Good evening. My name's Maggie Lennon, and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Tuesday, the 16th of November. I'll start the show with the most up-to-date COVID statistics. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 3,537,204 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,848,622 have been confirmed negative, and 688,582 have tested positive. There are 2,771 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all of those with symptoms will be tested. There are 17 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 9,406. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 779 were in hospital last night, 57 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 o'clock this morning, 4,331,574 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,930,317 their second. The latest UK daily figures show 143,159 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 214 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. The Office of National Statistics report in the latest week, ending the 6th of November, the estimated percentage of the community population that had COVID-19 was 1.70% in England, that's 1 in 60, 2.13 in Wales, that's 1 in 45, 1.35 in Northern Ireland, 1 in 75, and 1.18 in Scotland, 1 in 85 people. There were 1,194 deaths involving coronavirus registered in the UK in the week ending the 5th of November. Of these, 892 were registered in England, 98 in Wales, 140 in Scotland, and 59 in Northern Ireland. The number of deaths registered in the UK in that week was 13,209, which was 1,943 more than the 5-year average. I'm joined tonight down the line by Linda Fabiani. Good evening, Linda. How are you?
I'm grand, thank you, Maggie. Hello, everyone.
We're starting off tonight with a number of stories, which is covering ground where we've been before, and that's Tory corruption. And I've decided we've got to stop calling it sleaze. It really has to be called corruption, I think. And nothing more represents that than the whole debacle recently over Owen Paterson. But today, MPs have finally approved a report that found the Tory former cabinet minister broke lobbying rules, ending a humiliating U-turn Boris Johnson was forced to embark on after he tried to overhaul the parliamentary standards system. 2 weeks on from initially voting to spare Owen Paterson from suspension, the government and Conservative backbenchers eventually endorsed a report that found him guilty and scrapped the body that was to be set up to give their former colleague a right of appeal. In a bid to quell the growing fury within Boris Johnson's own party, the Commons leader Jacob Rees-Mogg said he'd made a mistake by conflating his support for reforming the standards system with the result of a 2-year investigation into Mr. Paterson. He faced condemnation from senior Conservatives, including the former Prime Minister Theresa May, who said that despite ministers' bid to rectify the situation, it will not undo the damage that has been done. Although the Deputy Chief Whip told Tory MPs it was a free vote, but that the Chief Whip would be voting for the Paterson report, a sign of encouragement for others to do the same, there was no formal division, as no one in the chamber signalled opposition, meaning it was approved on the nod. Chris Bryant, the chair of the Standards Committee, said he was pleased a decision had been taken that would draw a line under the unfortunate events of recent weeks and empowered the group to maintain a robust and effective standards system. Invited several times to apologise for his handling of the Patterson scandal, the Prime Minister has declined. Responding to proposals to curb MPs' paid consultancies announced by Boris Johnson today, SNP Westminster Deputy Leader Kristen Oswald MP called them shoddy, half-baked proposals to distract media scrutiny from his government. Ms Oswald went on to say that these were minor adjustments which would do nothing to end the corrupt practices of parties handing peerages to millionaire donors, and they wouldn't stop Boris Johnson breaking the ministerial code and then letting himself off the hook. So, not only will he not apologise, Linda, he ran away last week when it was being debated in the House of Commons. I don't suppose you're surprised at that.
There's nothing that man can do that surprises me anymore, Maggie. I mean, you used the word debacle. Yeah, what a debacle. And what really strikes me about it is that they thought they would get away with it. The complacency that's inherent in that so-called leadership is astounding. They thought they could get away with it. They thought they could ride roughshod through everything and protect their pal. Realised very quickly that they couldn't. And I have to give credit where credit's due. A lot of the Tories themselves were appalled by it. Some of them thought they'd help the government out and then got well shafted. You know, just completely dropped it. They must have been absolutely raging at that. So here we are, Rees-Mogg standing up with a sort of apology, but it was him that did it. It was he who brought these things together. And he's now under some level of scrutiny himself. So it's an absolute debacle. You've got, and Kirsten Oswald's right, you've got Boris Johnson now saying going to make it unacceptable for MPs to take lobbying jobs. Well, it's been unacceptable for centuries. It's been unacceptable to anyone with any degree of ethics. So that's no more than just trying to divert attention away. I mean, away from things like, as Kirsten said, putting millionaires in the House of Lords. Well, she put his brother into the House of Lords. I mean, the House of Lords, as far as I'm concerned, is a corrupt institution in the first place, the way it's run. So it just gets worse and worse with this lot. And we shouldn't let them divert attention. I'm
Do
a
you
bit
think?
disappointed at Keir's. Oh, sorry, on you go,
No, I
Maggie.
was going to say, do you think Chris Bryant's right, though, that it will draw a line under this unfortunate
No,
incident? And do you think
no,
a
it
line should
absolutely
be
will not.
drawn?
No, no line should be drawn at all. It's outrageous what's been going on. It should be full transparency. I'm a wee bit concerned at Keir Starmer. What I heard, he's calling for a full review and all the rest of it. Got to get a wee bit stronger. Got to call it what it is. A full review, but we kick it into long grass for a couple of years and then they come back with recommendations of how it can be better. No, Mr. Starmer, you're supposed to be the leader of the opposition. Stop behaving like part of the establishment. Just call it out for what it is. Listen to some of your own backbenchers. I mean, Jess Phillips, I thought she was pretty good in some of the stuff she said. Call them out for what it is. It's corruption, plain and square, and it shouldn't be allowed to continue, and no lines should be drawn.
I saw, yeah, that's what I was saying. I think we do need to call it corruption. Stop calling it sleaze. Sleaze makes it sound a bit Benny Hill like, sort of titter titter
Aye,
under
well,
your hand.
yeah.
It's just corruption, plain and simple. I saw a poll today and I don't know if it was just out today or whether it's an old one. I mean, I don't mean old, maybe a day or two ago, of voting intentions if there was an election for Westminster. And it showed that the Tories had lost 80 seats, that Labour had gained
All right.
69. I think SNP had gained 9, and Lib Dems and Plaid Cymru had each gained 1, with Greens staying the same. I thought that was quite interesting because that does seem to be a bit of a shift. And it looked like from the map that I saw that a little bit of the red wall had come back. There was a little bit up near
All right.
in the northwest of England that had gone red again. So I don't know if you'd seen that, but I wondered if that
No, I
was
didn't. No.
I wonder if that is a sign that, as Theresa May says, the damage has been done, and how
Do you
damaging
know,
this
it's
might be.
interesting, Maggie. In fact, I think we had the discussion when this stuff first came out, and Boris Johnson and Rees-Mogg, were announcing they were going to change the rules and all the rest of it. I think we had a chat around that, maybe on the programme, saying, wait a minute, this might just be the straw that
Mm.
breaks the camel's back here, because it's so blatant, so very, very blatant. And it may well be that this is the thing that's now showing the effect,
Mm.
in the opinion polls that you're talking about. It's whether it sustains or not. And that's why I would like to see Keir Starmer being a bit
Well,
stronger.
the point is, it's not the only bit of corruption, it's in the news. So there's the next story is placed to that exactly the same. The SNP has warned that cronyism is thriving under Boris Johnson's scandal-ridden Tory government, following further revelations of the UK government's handling of taxpayer-funded COVID contracts through its VIP lane. Politico has today published details of firms linked to Tory figures that secured lucrative contracts through the UK government's fast-track system. It also includes details of Tory peer and former party chair Andrew Feldman securing multiple contracts worth tens of millions of pounds for firms during the pandemic. It also found that Tory peer Michelle Mone referred PPE MedPro through the VIP channel. The firm went on to win contracts worth around £200 million, despite Mone previously denying helping the company. One of the firm's directors, an Anthony Page, was a former secretary for MGM Media, a company that deals with Mone's personal brand. Politico added that Page is also a director of Knox House Trust, part of the Knox Group, which is run by Mone's husband, Douglas Barrowman. Other Tory figures linked to COVID contracts include disgraced former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, helping to secure work for 4 companies, and Michael Gove, referring a firm to run by a Tory donor, which went on to secure contracts worth nearly £50 million. Now, we've talked about this before, Linda, as you said, and complacency, I think, is the key word. And 2 things. One, it's so common now, it's not really news and it's not really being reported. And 2, people have become inured to it, and it's as if they don't care, which makes me think it's a strategy by the current government to hold on to power. If they continue to put this out and about where people end up saying, oh, politicians, they're all the same, doesn't matter who you vote for, then they hold on to power. So individual MPs have maybe kind of woken up to this and made a fuss in the House of Commons in the last 2 weeks, but I'm not convinced that the British public have yet.
Yeah, it is a problem. I mean, even if you go back a few years, if just one of these things had happened, there would be absolute outrage. I think too, when these things happen, I often think, can you imagine if Nicola Sturgeon had done that? The outrage in Scotland would be absolutely huge. So I think there is a bit of a difference between how things are looked at in Scotland and how things are looked at. I think probably how things are looked at in Wales as well, to be fair, and how things are looked at in England as the biggest partner in the UK. And I'll go back to what I've said before. I think part of that is the fault of the opposition because people are not seeing a viable alternative. They're not seeing anything that they can say, well, actually, they're not the same. That's a bit different. And it really annoys me that very often we all get lumped in. I mean, as a former MSP who only retired, 6 months ago, I know that in the Scottish Parliament, most MSPs would not behave that way. And I mean, the Scottish Government opened a hotline, if you like, for MSPs, saying, if you get constituents saying that they want to help with any of this stuff and see a way of doing it, please use this and pass their names in. Now, I did that. Many people did that. But I'll tell you what, Maggie, I would pass names through. Now, I'm not qualified to know whether somebody or some company or individual would be a suitable person or company to be supplying what was needed during COVID. So I would never have followed any of these things up. Fire it through, let somebody that knows what they're doing look at it. It's not the firing it through and passing things on that's the problem. It is then acting and lobbying on their behalf. And I'm quite shocked to hear what you said about, the stuff around Michelle Mone there. I hadn't picked up on that at all. Now, if that's been happening a lot in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, that is just so out of order.
And you can
And
see the web that was there, different directors involved in
absolutely,
different companies. And
absolutely.
it is a tangled web. But if you're shocked about that, you're going to be about to fall off your seat with the next story, because I
Oh
must
no,
admit, this even took me by surprise. 28
right.
MPs get almost 225,000 in wages and freebies
Mm,
from the gambling industry. 4 hours after Conservative MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benton, had warned the UK Parliament that a review of betting laws must not be driven by anti gambling ideology, Mr. Benton took his seat at Wembley to watch England play Denmark in the Euro 2020 semi final, courtesy of Ladbrokes. Free hospitality worth £3,500. In his speech, Mr. Benton had called for casinos to be allowed more slot machines, not less. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. We've got a problem with the autocue again. I'll just have to read off the piece of
we'll just
paper.
go into one of your rants, Maggie. We all like them.
Um, Oh, here we're back again. In his speech, Mr. Benton had called for casinos to be allowed more slot machines, not less, adding that many people would be concerned about the Gambling Commission's plans for affordability checks, both online and in person, a measure which has been suggested intended to prevent ruinous losses. Days earlier, he'd enjoyed another day out, this time at Ascot, courtesy of the Betting and Gaming Council, the trade body for the gambling industry. In total, he accepted hospitality worth $7,495 during a gambling-funded summer of sport. All in all, according to a Guardian report, 28 MPs, 19 Conservative and 9 Labour, have taken almost 225,000 in wages and freebies from the gambling industry since August last year. During the same debate at which Benton spoke, one of his 2 speeches favourable to the gambling industry that month, Labour's John Speller interceded. He referred to the urgent need to improve and continue Britain's attractiveness as a casino destination. He had recently been a guest of the Paddy Power Only Flutter at England's match against Germany and was due to attend the cricket at Lord's the following month at a cost of £874 to the Gambling Commission, whose members include major casino companies. The gambling sector's charm offensive comes in the run-up to the publication of a white paper on gambling reform, expected early next year, that could significantly curb the profitability of bookmakers and online casinos. One peer described the industry's charm offensive as pretty obvious, an attempt to influence the outcome of the reforms. By far the biggest beneficiary of the gambling industry's largesse over the past year was Philip Davis, the Conservative MP for Shipley, who has accepted almost £50,000 to advise the Ladbrokes owner Entain on safer gambling and customer service. In addition to what it paid Davis, Entain spent almost £41,000 on hospitality for 13 MPs over the summer. In total, 28 MPs are either paid by the gambling industry or have accepted hospitality from it since August. All of the hospitality and salaries were declared to the Register of Members' Interest in line with parliamentary rules, and beneficiaries include the Conservative MPs Caroline Dinenage, who is a minister within the Department for Digital, Cultural, Media and Sport, which is overseeing the gambling review. The BGC is led by Michael Dewar, a former Labour MP. So, this is poach your turn gamekeeper. The department that is overseeing these much needed reforms in gambling legislation is kind of on the take, as it were, in receipt of hospitality. They're not hiding it. It's there. And that's the blatantness of it. It's there for all to see in the Register of Members' Interest. But I just simply cannot understand. I run a charity. And if trustees have a conflict of interest with anything that comes up during a board meeting, they have to declare it and leave the room, and they can't vote on it. What is it too simple to suggest that that could happen? That if you have if you have a noted interest in something, then you shouldn't be allowed to vote in the House of Commons on it? Or is that too simple? Would that not work, Linda?
Oh man, I didn't fall off my seat, Maggie, but I'm stunned. What a bunch of shysters, you know. How do you deal with that? Now, yes, they register it, and then if they register it, it's okay. And that just sounds ridiculous to me.
I mean, a register of
Not to be
interest
able.
is there for that reason, to show where
Ah,
there's a potential conflict. So it's a
ah,
conflict
and
of
people
interest.
should
So
report it.
would it be undemocratic, for example, to say if you've got a conflict of interest on an issue where you're being paid as a consultant or an advisor,
Mm-hmm.
or you've taken hospitality, you cannot vote on issues related to that when they come up? Or would that not be fair? I don't know.
Well, I don't. Well, I think the first thing is they shouldn't. And let's make a distinction between um, the wages, the board payments, and the hospitality. Because I remember a couple of chaps in the Scottish Parliament getting absolute pelters for going to some football match. It was probably 50 quid's worth or something like that. And I don't think there was any intention by them to then lobby. It was Scots guys want to go to a game of football. Um, what I would say is, I think if people are getting paid like that, and it's on the register of interest, there is a clear conflict of interest there. And if they are going to speak in the House of Commons about that, or indeed the House of Lords, because I know that the Lords are supposed to have really strict rules on that, but I'm not convinced that they don't find ways around it. They should absolutely have to declare
Mm.
that interest
Mhm.
up front and from the start. And I also think that the party leadership should have some responsibility in this as well. Why are you letting your members that are elected by the goodwill of people to behave this way?
It makes you wonder
Uh,
whether the party leaders ever check the register's interest, the register of interest, to
But I
find
don't
out
know if
what
it's about
people are.
even checking the register of interests. It's just about having an acceptable level of behaviour in your elected members that if they deviate from, they should be getting hauled up by the leadership.
So that would
Because
work then. So let's take the case of Caroline Dinenage, who's the minister within the department of
they should be
that's overseeing it.
sacked.
Well, that's going further than you suggested. But what you're suggesting is if she was going to
Uh-huh.
speak in this debate, she should say before she speaks, members of the House should be aware that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I've a beneficiary of hospitality from X, Y, and
Mm-hmm.
Z, and,
Mm-hmm.
draw your own conclusions from that. At least
Uh-huh.
that would make it kind of
Yeah,
clear.
but if she's still a member, sorry, if she's still a member of the government in the Department of Culture and Sport, as you said, poacher turned gamekeeper,
Yeah,
how
that was, I
could
think,
that
quite
happen?
shocking.
How
Yeah.
can that happen? How can the leadership of any group turn a blind eye to that and think that's acceptable behaviour? The rot is from the top right to the bottom,
Well, as I say,
and
it wouldn't be
it's just
accepted in the
unacceptable.
third sector. It wouldn't be accepted in the
No, it
charity
wouldn't.
sector,
It certainly
where
wouldn't.
governance is so
Mhm.
tight. And I mean, and we're never talking about the same sort of conflict of interest, but it just wouldn't be allowed. It has to
Mm.
always be declared in your annual report and accounts. It has to be
Mm.
submitted on your own annual register of interest, and our trustees know that they have to make that clear during a board meeting.
Aye.
But I
And you
think the
know
other
what, Maggie? These same MPs would be the very ones that would be standing up on their hind legs and having a go at Joe Punter, who was seen to be getting any benefit. But they think they're
Exactly.
above all that. They think they're
Exactly.
above all that. And
But
that
but
is what's absolutely wrong with that
But the
Westminster
other
system.
thing that's wrong with it is they're trying to block legislation which is desperately needed in order to put a curb on gambling in this country, which is such a
Mhm.
scourge for people who are poor. You only have to look, I
Uh-huh.
mean, Glasgow's a classic example. Some of the poorest areas of the city, you walk up the streets or you walk through the shopping precincts, and every other retail unit is a
Mhm.
gambling shop. And I've often wondered, now I know that this is a reserved matter, but surely
Mhm.
local authorities have power to look at licensing and planning to say,
Well,
enough
mhm.
already. We've got
Well,
enough of these in an area.
we brought in some. I can't remember the detail, but we did bring in legislation in the Scottish Parliament. You may remember a couple of years back, Stuart McMillan, the MP for Inverclyde, MSP for Inverclyde, worked really, really hard on it, and it was about limiting the bets and the machines, the puggy
Yes,
machines and the
yes.
bookies, and there was also planning restrictions were able to be put as well through local authorities. So that was good. But you know, it's endemic. It's not just the bookie shops and all that. I'm horrified, Maggie, at times. You know that way when you sit sometimes at night and you're too blooming lazy to go to your bed and you watch nonsense on the TV.
Mm.
And I'm always really shocked when these programs come on, you know, encouraging people to bet in the middle of the night, stuff in STV and stuff. And I don't know if the BBC do it. I don't want to badmouth them any more than usual. But I'm always really shocked, you know, when you see these nice wee guys, Ant and Dec, who must be multimillionaires themselves and don't need the money, on the telly in the middle of the night trying to encourage people who can't sleep to spend a fortune and phone in betting. So it's not just the bookies, it's not just the horse racing and the dogs and everything else.
Mm.
It's just everywhere people look, every screen they look at, their iPads, their phones, their TV screen, and being encouraged to spend money on pretty much losing bets all the time because these companies don't do that and not make a profit.
Well, the house
And
always wins, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
thing that we know. And
And
so, do you think there is any such thing as
um,
responsible betting? Because that's what betting companies are trying to promote now. Say have your limits, know your limits, set your limits, and we'll make sure you don't go over them. Do you think that's
I mean,
possible?
no, well, it's a difficult one because I mean, people should have the right to be able to gamble if they wish. I mean, the lottery and the pools and all that, they're all forms of gambling. So where do you stop? What I'm not convinced about is that those who are making huge profits by it are, in fact, the ones that should be putting the limits on and encouraging
Mm,
responsible betting.
mm,
Because I've heard too many horror stories on the radio. Um, in fact, is it Radio 4 does a really good consumer programme. Can't remember what it's called. And I've heard a few of their programmes where they're taking on the betting industry and saying, come on, you're letting folk run up thousands here. Gamblers Anonymous will tell you
hmm.
about people who've just got in way over their heads, sitting at their computer or on their mobile phone. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I'm really pleased that some of my colleagues, like Stuart McMillan and I think Ronnie Cowan at Westminster, have been doing stuff as well. You know, to really curb some of this stuff, because there's got to be a point where governments say, no, this is just too much. And the very
Hmm.
idea that there's members in the House of Commons, members of the government, who are openly advocating on behalf of betting firms and everything else and the industry and getting paid for doing so is completely unethical as far as I'm concerned.
Well, turning to something that is an awful lot more ethical than that is the new 13 million green energy investment that's been announced by the Scottish
Mhm.
National Investment Bank. Marking the bank's first year of operation, the new finance will accelerate the delivery of the Iona Wind Partnership's onshore wind project, powering 850,000 homes with clean, renewable power. Since its formation, the bank has built a mission led investment portfolio and provided support to businesses investing in key areas of the Scottish economy. This includes companies developing satellite communications, thermal energy storage, technology, and tidal turbines. Finance and Economy Secretary Kate Forbes said The need for the bank remains clear to help drive financial innovation and channel public and private investment into areas of the economy which offer solutions to the biggest problems facing Scotland. Its missions are supporting our just transition to net zero, improving places and allowing people to flourish through innovation. Having made a strong start in its first year, it's already delivering and investing in the technologies of the future. The bank is focused on long-term outcomes and has an essential role to play in combining public and private sector investment to tackle climate change. Now, I can remember when this was first mooted at an SNP conference, I think
Mm-hmm.
maybe 2 years ago. And I think at the
Mm-hmm.
time there was a great feeling that an investment bank is not a new idea. There are several models of it around Europe, but that this might go a bit further in Scotland, and that although it was key to the green just transition, that it might help develop alternative models of business that were more linked to the well-being economy rather than the sort of more traditional kind of form of the economy, and that included supporting employee ownership. It included supporting cooperatives, social enterprises, community interest companies. And critically, I think it flagged up the need to support more women into business, because one of the things about the green transition is so much of the work and jobs that will come from that are in manufacturing, albeit modern technology manufacturing. And these jobs typically benefit men more just because of the way the world works. So while this is a good story, and it was being debated today in Holyrood, do you think that the investment bank, although it's only been going a year, has met its full potential at all? Or do you think there's real opportunity here for it to go much further and be a real game changer in the future Scotland?
I think there is the opportunity, Maggie. I agree with you on that. I can understand why in the first couple of years it tends to have gone for big projects, headline things. I mean, some of the stuff that we've been doing in Scotland feeds into the good reputation that Scotland has got in terms of what we've been doing, and that showed up very much at the COP conference over the last couple of weeks. So it's fairly early days, but I would hope that some of the MSPs across parties in Holyrood will now be pushing. Now that the big headline ones are there, they'll be saying, look, there's room for others. Now, community ownership, cooperatives, employee ownership, small businesses, focusing on those who find it most difficult to get into the business market. I mean, Gillian Martin, MSP, has been doing a lot of work for women entrepreneurs in that regard. And I know that Kate Forbes is also pretty committed to that, as is, of course, the First Minister. So it's very, very easy for governments to get caught up in the big stuff. And this announcement's great. Of course, it's great. But I think we can now expect that they should take stock to a certain extent and be able to dole things out a bit more across the board. So
And
I hope so.
my understanding is, in terms of investment, it's really for public money to be invested, and also any
Mm-hmm.
private equity is through private capital
Mm-hmm.
developed by business. Is there an opportunity? Is there a role in any kind of model for an investment bank for individuals to be able to invest? For us, if you like, to invest in the country's future, almost to buy bonds in the country.
All
Was that
right.
ever conceived as part of the idea, or is that too left field for it to be comfortable?
I was not part of any of the discussions on this. I wasn't on any of the committees that dealt with it. So I can't answer your question, Maggie. What I could say is that I know there was discussion on that very issue in terms of discussion about the potential for an independent Scotland, because it all ties in with what's reserved, what's not reserved, etc. So I think an independent Scotland could be truly innovative in an awful lot of these ways. I mean, let's face it, the UK does it with their premium bonds and all that kind of thing. Of course they do. So an independent Scotland could do that too. And the idea of being able to invest like that to the well-being of your country, not just, as you said, the economy as we deem it, and growth, economic growth, and all the rest of it, but well-being. And Nicola Sturgeon has been, pretty good on some of that stuff, but a lot of it is intention so far. So I think it's time that we should be able to see some of that come into action. Under the devolved settlement, we should be doing what we can, and I think the investment bank is a good vehicle for that. However, the real potential's there for an independent Scotland, and well, that's what I want to see.
And as you say, there's been a lot of talk about the wellbeing economy,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure there's been an awful lot maybe backing that up. But I think it's
No.
understood now, and this is one of the things that, maybe some of the positive stuff from COP26, because in my view, there wasn't an awful lot of positive stuff came out of it. That this idea that there are other ways to assess how a country is doing by its people. I mean, a country's biggest
Well,
asset
yeah.
is its people, let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And you measure how they're doing by exactly measuring their well-being, their levels of satisfaction, happiness, alongside more traditional measures of poverty and the like. So yeah, I'd like to think
Mm-hmm.
that it's had its first year. I believe it's actually done quite well in terms of being quite successful as a vehicle for investment.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen any figures, so I don't know how well, but it has gone okay. So yeah, let's hope that from now on they get the
Yeah.
bit between their teeth
Do you
and
know,
do a bit more.
it's interesting, Maggie. I mean, the whole thing about well-being as opposed to gross national product, etc. Many years ago, I was on a steering group through Oxfam, along with Patrick Harvey, in fact, where we did a study on that with Oxfam. A lot of work. And I remember when the report came out, the sort of general view of it was, oh, that's all very nice, and yeah, nice people that want to do that nice kind of thing. And it wasn't taken that seriously. But we're at a stage now, not that much further on, that people are taking it seriously and talking about it as viable. So I think we have moved on, and there's more of an intention there across the board to be able to be serious about this kind of thing, which is so very, very important. Because actually, in terms of the economy, in the longer term, it's sensible.
Mm. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
because just measuring things like GDP doesn't pay any attention to people
No.
who are contributing to the economy but not being paid. There's no monetary value, so unpaid carers, mostly women, of
Yep.
course. Even just housework, none of that is taken into consideration, and yet all of that is contributing to society. Unpaid carers are doing the job that otherwise public funds would have to be put into. So yeah, I
Yep.
think it has got potential. Let's hope that we're going to see some big things, and
Yeah.
maybe we'll get Gillian on to speak about what she's been doing for female
That would be good. Yeah.
entrepreneurs. The Scottish Greens have said that the fact that landlords increased rents during the coronavirus pandemic proves the need for rent controls. New statistics on the private rented sector show the cost of renting a two-bedroom flat increased above inflation in 10 of the 18 rental market areas across Scotland, showing that reduced demand did not deter landlords from putting prices up. A national system of rent control is set to be delivered as a key part of the Scottish Greens deal with the Scottish Government as part of several measures to enhance tenants' rights. Responding to the latest data, Scottish Greens housing spokesperson Ariane Burgess said, "It's astonishing that rents continue to rise in the midst of a pandemic when demand was low and people were struggling with reduced income. In most parts of Scotland, those rises were above inflation. If landlords won't lower the rents in those conditions, then when will they? These figures show that we cannot leave something as fundamental as the people's homes to market forces. That's why I'm proud the Scottish Greens will bring rent controls back to Scotland." I was wondering about that phrase, rent controls back to Scotland. When did we have a period of rent control before? I'm not
Yeah, we
aware of
did.
that.
We did.
When was that?
Yeah. It was back, the rent controls were abolished in the 60s,
Oh.
I think. I think. Now, I come from a housing background, albeit it's many, many, many years ago. And my first career was in housing, and it was dealing with tenement properties mainly that were in a state of disrepair. It was the time of housing action areas and everything else. So I'm not, I don't think you can just look at rent controls as something that will fix the problems. I think it's got to be part of a much wider thing, because one of the reasons that rent controls were abolished, when I say it, if I remember rightly, I'm not that old. What I remember being taught and learning at the time I was working in housing was that it gave landlords an excuse not to properly look after their homes because they said they couldn't afford to do so. And that's how you ended up with an awful lot of slum landlords and things like that, that public money had to go in and help sort. We've still got issues in that. I mean, one of the problems was, take the right to buy, for instance. All of a sudden, you've got thousands of landlords across the country who own one house and think they should be making a profit from it. So there's a real issue there. And it's about housing being seen as an economic asset for
Yeah,
folk
a commodity.
as opposed to homes for everyone.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple as saying we impose rent controls and everything will be fine. I mean, we need to be looking at common repairs and tenements and stuff, sinking funds, making owners and landlords take full responsibility for the state of the houses that either people live in as owner, or that people let out and expect to make a profit from. So I don't know the details of what the Greens are talking about, but I do know that rent controls on their own are a bit of a blunt tool that will not solve the overall housing issue. I mean, if you take East Kilbride, where I used to represent, and Colette Stevenson now does, a huge amount of these right to buy properties have ended up in the hands of private landlords who maybe own Granny's house, for example, and think, one house and think they should be making a profit. But you've also got people who have bought up repossessions, for example, and different houses and have a portfolio. There should be something in place that says if you are renting a home to someone, you have an obligation as landlord to make sure that home is decent and meets these requirements and the level of maintenance that you as landlord must carry out.
Well, as you
So
say,
it
we don't.
has to be looked at
I
in
don't
more
think
than
we
rent
know yet
controls.
what else is in the measures, because it is part of a
Exactly.
package of tenants' rights. But also, what you say is absolutely right. But and that's before we get onto the issue of houses that have been taken out of the market for people to live in permanently, for holiday homes and Airbnbs and everything
Yeah.
else. And that's obviously in some parts of Scotland in particular an absolute problem. And I don't think there's really
Yep.
any satisfactory way of dealing with that. Moving away from the domestic agenda for a few minutes, Polish riot police on the country's border with Belarus have fired water cannon and tear gas at people forcibly attempting to cross into the European Union. The clashes come a day after the EU government's approved sanctions against the Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko for allegedly engineering the crisis by allowing thousands of asylum seekers from the Middle East to travel through Belarus to the border with Poland. Televised footage from the border this morning showed dozens of men throwing rocks and approaching a fence near the border crossing at the Polish town of Kuźnica. Polish border guards responded by firing water cannon and tear gas at them. Videos showed stun grenades detonating near migrants on the Belarusian side of the border. Poland has claimed that the stun grenades were provided by Belarus. Poland and Lithuania have declared states of emergency that give police sweeping new powers to summarily expel migrants and ignore requests for asylum. NGOs have complained that Polish authorities have refused to allow aid for migrants into the border area, and journalists have been prevented from reporting close to the border. By contrast, Tuesday's clashes at the border were covered by live state television in Belarus, where Lukashenko has sought to blame the border crisis on the European governments. Belarusian troops have been accused of cutting through border fencing and pushing migrants into making dangerous attempts to cross the border. On Monday, the local Muslim community of Bohoniki, a village in northeast Poland, held a funeral for Ahmed al-Hassan, a 19-year-old from Syria, who was found dead in the Bug River in eastern Poland on the 19th of October. According to witnesses, Ahmed, who could not swim, was pushed by a Belarusian soldier to enter the water. The funeral was streamed via Skype to the family of the young man. Yesterday, the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights arrived in Poland on a 4-day visit. So once again, this is the poor migrant is in the middle of all this and is suffering. But there are so many flagrant abuses of international law in that story, I don't know where to begin. The first one, obviously, is the fact that Poland and Lithuania are refusing to accept claims of asylum. Now, that is in direct breach of international law. It's in direct breach of the UN Convention for Refugees, of which both countries are signatories. I haven't heard the UN making much noise about this. Have you?
No. And I'm not convinced that the EU are playing their part as they should either. It's all very well, and I understand how they feel about Belarus. I get all that. But as you say, as always, it's the poorest of people who end up in the middle of these power struggles with nations. And we do have a responsibility internationally to people who are forced to flee. And it seems to me that the international community isn't taking much responsibility at all for these people. And these people must be desperate. Oh, my goodness. I mean, Belarus is just appalling. I think that goes without saying.
Well, what's not at all clear is what Belarus plan to do with these migrants if they can't get into Poland, or they can't get into the European Union. In terms of they have an obligation. They have brought these migrants into the country. They've enticed them into the country with the belief that they can get into Europe. But they're not saying what they are going to do with the migrants who will be stuck in the country with winter approaching. That in itself is also a breach of international law, and never mind of human rights. And so at the moment they seem to be stuck in no man's land with no one taking care of them. So what should be done? Who should be taking responsibility for them, Linda?
Well, I think if we assume that Belarus will refuse to take any responsibility and just abandon these people to starvation, death, I think the rest of the international community has to step up. And I think the prime responsibility of anyone in any nation with any decency is to look after these people. I hope that there's discussions going on in the background. I mean, I think Poland and Lithuania's behaviour at the moment is grim as well. But if
Yes,
they're
and
not getting any
neither country
backing
have
at
a good
all,
neither country have a good record in dealing with asylum
absolutely not.
seekers. Poland
But if they're
particularly
not getting any
has a very
backup
poor
or
record.
any proper discussion with the other members of the European Union, they should be. But then we've had this all along. I mean, we've been going on. There's been a few years now that particular member states in the European Union have been angry that they're seen to be taking the bulk of what they see as a migration problem, with the other states not stepping up to be of assistance. And it's just going to get worse. That's the thing. This is not going to get any better. You know,
Yeah, and
all
while
the
while
troubles
we're
that have been caused by rich nations on poorer nations are now coming to the fore.
exactly, and
That's what we're seeing.
while we're ramping up the counts of breaches of
Yeah.
international law, should Belarus attempt to send these people back to the countries where they may not even be certain where people are originally from, if these people would be at risk of harm at going back, that's called refoulement, and that's also against international law.
Yeah.
On a slightly more positive note to do with migrants, Norway has urged other countries to contribute to a United Nations fund by providing cash directly to Afghans so they can survive the winter. With the Afghan economy imploding, the United Nations set up the fund last month to provide direct help for local households, bypassing the Taliban and drawing on donor funds frozen since it took power in August of this year. Norway has pledged 23 million to the fund, which is managed by the UN Development Programme. We encourage other countries to do the same, to pitch in to avoid a pressing humanitarian crisis and a potential famine. The foreign minister said in an interview ahead of a UN Security Council meeting on Wednesday. Norway was also funneling cash to aid women's organisations in Afghanistan, she said, and Norway's humanitarian aid to the country would total 325 million crowns this year alone. Norway will take over the UN Security Council presidency from January. I hope the discussion in the Security Council tomorrow will contribute to give some attention to the situation in Afghanistan to mobilise more funds, she said. The fund's purpose is to build a bridge between a humanitarian effort and something more long term in order for people to support themselves, she added. I'm tempted to say I wouldn't hold my breath that the Security Council are going to do very much. You know, they've gotten out. You know, America and Britain, they don't care anymore. Biden has suffered huge personal loss of support over his withdrawal from Afghanistan from both sides, those that, you know, on the left and those on the right. He doesn't want to be reminded of the disaster he's left behind. I don't think anybody's going to put their hand in their pocket, least of all the United States or the United Kingdom, but I could be wrong. Am I wrong, Linda?
Well, I hope so. My hope is that the likes of Biden and the UK might try to get cynically some public support back by being seen to try and make some form of reparation in some way. So fingers crossed that I don't care what their motivations are, if they help.
I think the other thing we
So,
also have to be aware of, though, in situations like this, is how do they make sure the money is getting to where it needs to be going
well, yeah,
and not being
yeah,
diverted through corruption. I can't imagine the Taliban are delighted
uh-huh,
about this money coming to the country,
yeah.
certainly not to help women go into any kind of
Norway are pretty good at
education.
that stuff, though.
They are pretty good
The
at that stuff.
Scandinavian
Yeah,
countries are pretty good at that stuff, at dealing directly with NGOs and things.
yeah.
Um, so let's hope that that's. In
Well,
fact,
let's hope
I
so.
have to say the Scottish government's international development fund is pretty good at that as well. So it can be done.
Mm,
The Taliban are a difficult people to bypass. Don't get me wrong,
absolutely.
but if the will is there, I think, you know, small nations working together are probably best placed to be able to help with that because they've got good relationships.
Back home in Scotland, a £25 million fund to improve ventilation in business premises and reduce the risk of COVID
Mm.
19 transmission will open for applications next week. Small and medium sized businesses, such as restaurants, bars, and gyms, will be able to claim back costs of up to £2,500 to undertake work, such as the installation of carbon dioxide monitors and remedial improvement work to windows and vents. Businesses will be able to fill in a self assessment form to receive advice on improving their current ventilation systems and identify if they're eligible for financial support from their local authority. Effective ventilation is a key public health measure to reduce the risk of COVID 19 spreading and is of increasing importance during autumn and winter while more people spend time indoors. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, in September we announced the establishment of a £25 million fund to help businesses improve ventilation. This fund now opens for applications next week. More information on eligibility has now been published on the Find Business Support website. All of these basic mitigation measures are really important at this stage, but some of them are also valuable long-term investments. For example, better ventilation won't just reduce the spread of COVID, it will also help reduce the spread of other airborne viruses now and in the future. Obviously, Linda, the numbers in Scotland are still continuing to go up slightly in terms of cases, but deaths are coming down. Numbers of people in
Mm-hmm.
hospital are coming down. Things are stabilising around intensive care. Nicola Sturgeon didn't mention any new changes to the rules and regulations today. Some people thought she might. Do you think there will be more coming in before Christmas? If you were advising the First Minister, what would you be advising her to do?
Gosh, you know, I wouldn't begin to advise the First Minister on anything like this. I'll leave that to the scientists and doctors. It was interesting. I mean, after I heard, I didn't hear Nicola Sturgeon today. I heard John Swinney talking about it afterwards and saying that things will be monitored as we go. I then heard a couple of health professionals talking about it, one of whom had wanted more restrictions to be brought in now, and the other who felt that we should wait and monitor things on a daily basis. Will they be brought in? I think there might be more about the passport issue. I know that it's contentious for a lot of people, and do you know, I was thinking about it earlier, and I heard some business people saying, "Oh, the passport thing is putting people off." Well, do you know what? I think what puts people off more is going into a place that looks as if there's not proper safety measures taken.
Mm,
If you go into a restaurant and it's very, very clear that they're taking every precaution possible and it's well run and well managed, you'll go back.
yep.
But if I went into somewhere where it looked like they weren't bothering their shirt, I wouldn't go anywhere near it. In fact, I'd probably leave. So I think as part of the public health measure and part of the confidence measures, this fund that the Scottish Government, the ventilation fund, is excellent. I had a look. I don't know if you're aware, Maggie. I had a look to see if this was happening anywhere else in the UK, but I couldn't see it.
I'm not
So it
aware
might be.
that it is. So yeah, it's not a lot of
Aye,
money, but
I
it,
think
it can't it can't
it's the
hurt.
front runner. Aye, absolutely. And I think it's a good thing. I mean, as all these things, I looked at the regulations and I thought, oh gosh, MSPs all over the country will be getting a
Yeah.
lot of emails here because these these great folk that have already done this thing for their business, there's no retrospective
Yeah.
grant.
Yeah, I
So
suspect
it's
that is
like
going to be one of the issues that comes
they'll
up. Well,
only
and no
try
doubt the
their
BBC
best.
will cover that in depth. And
Oh
finally,
yeah,
innovative projects to reopen some of the libraries that closed during the pandemic, or set up wellbeing cafes, or provide home library services have received more than £1 million in funding. The Scottish Government's Public Library COVID Relief Fund will support 23 projects around the country to reconnect communities with their libraries. Applications were made through the Scottish Library and Information Council, and allocations will also support reading and STEM education programmes. While priority was given to applications which support deprived areas and communities, all library services across Scotland were invited to apply for the fund. The Public Library COVID Relief Fund was announced as part of the programme for government, and all local authority library services were eligible. There were 23 projects over 21 local authorities funded. It's a £1.25 million fund. I was slightly surprised to discover that Glasgow is getting nearly £500,000, nearly 40% of that money, and the rest is spread out over packages of around 40,000. And Glasgow, really, apart from the Western Isles, is the only one of the local authorities where the money is being used to actually reopen libraries. And I'm wondering if these are libraries that would have closed anyway, whether pandemic or not had come along, just because of the fact that Glasgow's quite strapped for cash. I don't know if you've seen any of the detail of some of the projects that have been funded, but I did get a look at them, and some of them are really innovative, and some local authorities, I think, deserve a real pat on the back. My favourite
it's
is Renfrewshire. It's a multi-agency approach that will use social prescribing. I'm a big fan of
oh
social
good.
prescribing. Pathways to identify those most at risk of social isolation, loneliness, across a number of deprived localities. A timetable of cultural activities will tie into wider cultural regeneration and encourage people back to in-person events. And I think that's a key thing, that there's been
Yeah.
so much isolation that it's actually about getting people back together. So I think the local
Mhm.
authorities, and Renfrewshire is not the only one that's done this, others have done it. Well done. I think the ones that are basically getting the money to send out even more tablets to people and do more digital education, enough Zooms already, I think. But this is a positive thing. Do you use your local library?
Do you know, I when I represented East Kilbride, I was in the East Kilbride library quite a lot because they did all these innovative things, which was wonderful. It's a real community hub. So I'm hoping that it becomes that again. Um, I see they weren't getting any money though, but hey, just the way it
Yeah,
is.
I tried to
Uh,
find out. I got in touch with a couple of local authorities who haven't appeared on the list.
mm,
Certainly one of them, I believe, did put in a bid, but we don't know why they didn't get it, and we don't know what they bid for. So it's a bit of a shame. It's kind of a shame that if every
mm.
local authority bids, they didn't all get a little bit of money. I think
Well,
that would have been
South
fair.
Lanarkshire did get something. South Lanarkshire did get something for one of the more deprived areas.
Okay.
So that's fair enough, and it's a
And,
huge
and
local
and you're
authority.
right that libraries have
Mm,
changed over the years, and they are these centres and real hubs of community, hugely important.
absolutely.
And no library should ever be under threat. I think that should be something written in stone. That would be my message to the First Minister if I had her in front of me, which I don't. I've got you in front of me, Linda, but Maybe one day we'll
I
have the
don't have
first
a
minister.
hotline to the First Minister.
No, I know. Anyway, thank you very much for being with me this evening. That's all we've got time for.
Pleasure.
And thank you for watching. And we were talking earlier about investing. Well, you can't maybe invest individually in the National Investment Bank, but you could invest in Broadcasting Scotland. We desperately need people to put their hands in their pockets and give us some cash. It's not a cheap thing running a television studio. This television studio, we've now got 2 studios. We've got a little baby studio as well as the big studio. We've got an outside broadcasting unit. So if you want it all to keep happening, it's going to cost you. So please go online, www.broadcastingscotland.scot/donate, and see what you can do to make a regular contribution to keep us on the air. We had a lot of extra coverage during COP26, and we've got lots more planned, but it does, as I say, take cash. Once again, thank you very much for watching. I'll be back on Sunday with the full Scottish, and I'll see you then. In the meantime, have a good evening.